Hello and welcome back to Oh God What Now, fully registered with the council as a letting agent for this sumptuous podcast studio in the heart of vibrant Islington, with commanding views of the Witherspoons and the delights of the Balls Pond Road. Seats for no smokers. I'm Andrew Harrison, and on today's edition, our listeners have wanted it for years and now it might be on its way. Could electoral reform and or proportional representation finally be coming to the UK? In the past, appeals to reason, justice and democracy seem to have fallen on deaf ears or led to brush-offs like the forgotten alternative vote referendum of 2011. But now it seems that reform's rise in the polls is concentrating minds. Britain's idiosyncratic first-past-the-post system means that winner takes it all. And in a shattered five-party system, that could be Reform UK. Farage's party is currently polling at 27 to 30%, far ahead of Labour and the Tories, and numerous surveys predict that they will form the next government. An MRP from YouGov last week projected that Reform would win 311 seats in a general election, just 15 short of a majority. So what does Labour do? What do the Tories do? Is it time to face the fact that a multi-party system needs a multi-party electoral system? And if so, what kind? Here to help us explore it all is friend of the pod and electoral super wonk David Klemperer, researcher at the Institute for Policy Research at the University of Bath and fan of compulsory voting. Welcome back, David. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before we get into electoral reform, I want to ask you about, back in 2019, you wrote a pretty entertaining series of tweets predicting where all the cast of the thick of it would have ended up by now. And this included certain people leaving the civil service and going full-time FBPE and all kinds of stuff. I want you to tell me now, update it, the wheel has turned. Where are Malcolm Tucker, Terry Coverley, Ollie Reader and Peter Mannion now in 2025?
So the first thing is, I think that Malcolm Tucker and Stuart Pearson, despite absolutely hating each other, are now locked into an incredibly lucrative podcast.
Called The Rest Is Fuck Off.
Something like that,
yes.
Where they're forced to talk to each other constantly and hide their visceral hatred because the money is just too good.
Ian Nucci, if he's listening, will be like, I'm going to make that, actually. Yeah.
I think it would be quite good. I think you could do a little podcast series with them in character.
Yep.
Trying to do that. Maybe some front of house, some sort of behind the scenes.
Yep.
Other characters. So Terry Coverley devoted herself full-time to FBPE. I think she's probably now a 2024 intake Liberal Democrat MP.
Oh, yeah.
Then who else is there? Phil. In my thread, I had him becoming Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. I think he's probably still on the Conservative front bench, but now is sort of talking about Anglo-futurism and mass deportation, something like that. And then Peter Mannion, well, he's one of those sort of cuddly Tories, so we've decided to kind of all forget. Maybe he was like personally involved in slashing children's services. So, Rachel, I think you've given him a column in the New Statesman.
That is the kind of thing that we would do.
Yes. And where's Ollie?
I think he's probably been brought back into Downing Street to like fix everything. I think they've gone, we need some new people. Let's get some like spinner from the past. And he's been brought back in maybe after the Caerphilly by-election to sort things out.
This is horrifically plausible. Also here with us is electoral reform fan, associate political editor of the New Statesman, champion classicist and hardcore cat lady, Rachel Cunliffe. How are you?
Hello. I should say that my cat is not a fan of electoral reform.
Really? Is it a first past the post cat?
She's a one cat, one vote, and she's the cat and she gets the vote. That's her political
She's
philosophy.
not into the single transferable cat.
No. It's very simple.
But as we know, cats are Conservative and dogs are Labour, so you know what I mean?
think she's more of an anarchic libertarian.
Your cat's Reform UK. Before we get into the white-hot thrills of proportional representation, there are two big stories which I'm afraid you've got to feel because they've just landed. Firstly, the Andrew, formerly known as Prince, has withdrawing ex-Prince Andrew's title stopped the bleeding for the royal family? Because everybody who is a student of news management knows you don't do something like this unless something even worse is coming down the pipe.
Well, they thought, I think, that having him voluntarily say that he wasn't going to use his titles, which was what he did last week when the book was first published, or the extracts first came out. This is Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir. They thought that was going to stem the bleeding. And in fact, it raised a lot of questions like, hang on, this guy's punishment is saying that he's not going to use titles that, you know, the rest of us couldn't even dream of having anyway. And
Surrender
also,
your garter or whatever.
Yeah, and also, oh, by the way, what's going on with this 30-room mansion that you're just living in rent-free because? So it's a pretty big statement from the palace to remove those titles formally. I think it's significant that it's coming from the palace, from King Charles, not from Parliament, because Parliament could have acted on this. I know Keir Starmer didn't want to, but there are quite a few MPs who have been sort of agitating for, well, should we have a little bit of a closer look at this whole monarchy thing and what we were paying for and all the rest of it. So I think it's really significant that he's had his titles stripped from him. The last time this happened was 1919.
Who was that?
It was Ernest Augustus who had his titles removed for backing the Germans in
For backing
the
the
First World
Germans.
War.
But the royal family are the Germans.
Well, that's where it all gets a bit dicey,
Yeah.
doesn't it? But I think what has certainly happened the last week is there have been a lot of questions just around the monarchy in general, not just from the New Statesman, which ran a Abolish the Monarchy cover this week, but we're starting to think kind of, did this institution protect this guy for decades, possibly using taxpayer funds? And if so, shouldn't we, the British people, at least have a conversation about it?
Yeah, I think he should be publicly forced to apologise to all the Andrews, and that'll put a stop to it. But the other one, obviously, is Rachel Reeves. We're recording.
Also some housing drama.
We're recording at 1 o'clock on Friday, so obviously we could be having a terrible hostage to fortune here by the time this comes out on Monday and Tuesday. But now that the letting agent has taken the blame, is she in the clear? He said, tempting fate.
So those emails that were released on Thursday night that show the letting agent, I think, pretty astoundingly going, yeah, it was all our fault. We said we were going to apply for this license and then we didn't.
They
Sorry.
fell on their stapler.
Yeah. I think that has helped her position, certainly, because she does have evidence now that it wasn't her fault. However, it does contradict what she said earlier in the week, which was she didn't know that she needed a license at all. And you've got emails now showing that she did know that they needed a license. She just thought that it was being taken care of. And the tone of the exchange of letters between her and Keir Starmer has got quite frosty. I think he said in his latest one that it was regrettable that she didn't do a more thorough trawl through her emails, which in kind of politician speak is he's not best pleased, should we say. He's not going to get rid of her. We've got the budget in 3.5 weeks. She's too important. However, it's just another sign of that fraying relationship between number 10 and number 11. And also, it hasn't done anything to help the mood of Labour MPs who are noticing that there was another Labour minister who made an honest mistake and who thought that, she'd taken appropriate advice on something and it was all being sorted. And she lost her job. So, why does one rule apply to Angela Rayner, another rule apply to Rachel Reeves? And speaking to Labour MPs, there's quite a lot of disquiet about that discrepancy.
And just imagine being told off by Keir Starmer in his very, you've let yourself down, you've let me down, you've let the whole school down voice.
I think that's exactly the tone of voice that Keir Starmer would use.
I mean, if I may, I would just say that I'm very sympathetic to Rachel Reeves on this, but I really hope that this whole affair leads to a big society-wide conversation about letting agents and their many crimes.
Not all letting agents. Right then, electoral reform. Is this the parliament that finally bites the bullet on some form of it and even proportional representation? The case has been falling on deaf ears all my life. Neither Labour nor the Tories cared about wasted votes in safe seats or slender majorities on the popular vote leading to massive landslides or the suppression of minor parties as long as they were winning. But the resurrection of the Lib Dems, the rise of the Greens and, of course, the F word has left us with a two-party electoral system in a multi-party world and the prospect of first past the post handing a huge majority to an extreme party with no experienced talent, a capricious cult leader, and a programme cut and pasted from the worst of MAGA. So let's have a look at the politics of it all first, then we'll go into the available systems. Rachel, my old politics teachers 100 years ago used to tell me that the great benefit of first past the post was strong and decisive government. Are we going to get strong and decisive government, good and hard, whether we like it or not?
I think this is strong and decisive government. I think we're living through it.
God.
I think we are all starting to catch up on the fact that big majorities don't necessarily these days equal government that is able to act in decisive ways for various reasons, actually. I remember when, a couple of weeks after the election, the result was, did you hear it discussed as a sandcastle majority?
Yeah.
This idea that it could also be swept away because it was it looked in seat terms, it looked a lot stronger than actually the.
And there was also Loveless Landslide, wasn't there, which sounds like a My Bloody Valentine song.
I would listen to that.
Yeah.
And Rob Ford called it a masterpiece of political Jenga that I also quite like. Sort of this idea that you build something that's very tall but very fragile. And one of the ironies, I think, of the whole debate is of the last 15 years, the only government that lasted a full parliamentary term with the same prime minister was the coalition government with David Cameron. So clearly something is going on where the electoral results and what the government is and isn't able to do don't completely match up. Now, I don't think that our voting system is the one and only reason for that. I think there's a lot of reasons why politics has just got more difficult and more challenging. And actually, the previous question talking about MPs making mistakes on in their housing or business dealings or whatever, and Twitter suddenly launching at them and us demanding real-time consequences pretty much immediately sort of derailing everything. I think all of that has had an impact as well. But I don't think you can look at our electoral system right now and go, yes, it's working really well.
What's the vibe among Labour? We'll talk about the Tories in a minute, but I mean, is there any kind of, I'm not going to say a groundswell, but at least a ripple out there? Because we know that the mood among the Labour Party is pretty despairing right now.
It's really interesting with Labour and PR because in grassroots membership term, the Labour membership is in favour. They voted in 2022 in this sort of landmark party motion to be in favour of it. And the Labour Party is technically signed up to make votes matter and this agenda for tweaking our electoral system. Obviously, Labour just won a big majority on first past the post. Parties tend not to want to disrupt the system that they just won under. And so a lot of Labour MPs, a lot of new Labour MPs won under this system. But with all of that said, I think it's really interesting, two things. One is that the APPG on fair elections has 76 Labour members, which is quite sizable if you think of that as a chunk of the backbenchers. And when there was the 10-minute rule motion in December 2024 that was brought by a Lib Dem MP, which was completely non-binding, but where Parliament got to, I guess, have its say on how it felt about this, 59 Labour MPs voted yes and 50 voted no. So obviously most of them abstained, but that also shows a breadth of feeling, a diversity of feeling within the party that isn't necessarily in line with what the government is saying.
I mean, I can absolutely understand that everybody will the idea that you don't vote to change the system you just won under. But if you are staring down the barrel of A, defeat to reform with all the consequences of irreversible changes to the country, or B, go for electoral reform and understand that you've enacted another irreversible change, but it's more democratic, the idea that like a Labour victory under this system is not going to happen, then which way do they jump?
I think conversations are certainly going on, but I think those conversations are so many steps back from that at the moment. They're on what can we do to strengthen elections sort of more generally. So there are other things going on, like the votes at 16 thing. Yeah. I didn't think, and I said it on this podcast, I didn't think that the case of votes for 16 should be anything to do with Labour increasing the number of potential Labour voters. I think it's a good thing in and of itself. Labour people, some of them certainly thought that it would give them an advantage, and it's now sort of looking like it's not. So I think you've got to be very careful about going, we as a party are in a difficult situation, therefore we'll change the rules of elections to give ourselves an advantage. The Conservatives tried that with voter ID and it didn't help them at all and was a disaster in other areas. I think it's much more important to look at the electoral landscape as a whole and go, is this working? Is this leading to parliaments and governments that reflect what people actually want? If it isn't, let's rebuild it from first principles.
I absolutely agree. I think it would be very, very damaging for the course of electoral reform for it to be presented as a kind of partisan wheeze. And I think that part of the issue there is that there is a double standard on these things, which is the Conservatives often are able to get away with doing things quite explicitly as a partisan wheeze, but the centre-left is held to a much higher standard, and I don't think it would be very easy for the Labour Party to get away with that. And I think it would lead to a lot of backlash in the media and amongst the public.
David, the National Centre for Social Research does a rolling survey on support for PR, and the last one at the end of 2024, it did find that 60% of people are now in favour. Only 36% want to stick with FPTP. Is that a major shift, or have we been heading in that direction for a while?
So it is, on the numbers, quite a significant shift. I think it's the highest support for electoral reform that pollsters have yet found. electoral reform support has gone up and down. There was a reasonable amount of support in the kind of late New Labour era, but never quite reaching these levels. However, that being said, I'd be quite wary of overreading that, and I don't think it would make sense to interpret those numbers as being about real enthusiasm for PR itself. I think that the polling that was done as part of was about trust in institutions more generally. And I think what you're seeing there is the British public have a clear willingness at the moment to press any buttons marked change. And I think you could ask them about pretty much any set of institutions and go, would you like to change it? And you'd get pretty big majorities for yes.
Like the monarchy, for example.
Like the monarchy. I mean, I think the monarchy poll, it's still popular, but it's less popular than it was. And I think this speaks to a general discontent with institutions. So I think there is this real opportunity for electoral reform, because I think people are dissatisfied with the way we do things currently. But I think people, if they think that the public are actually desperately interested in electoral systems, they're deluding themselves.
Well, just to break down that, again, sticking with the politics of it, this week's YouGov poll, again, it's got Reform on 27%, Labour and the Tories on 17% each, and the Greens on 16%, and the Lib Dems on 15%. So that is a multi-party system in anybody's language. Everybody apart from Reform is on 15 to 17%. Labour and the Tories used to split 80% of the vote between them in 2017, and now they've got 34% of the vote in between them. It's like, is that a bit of an unanswerable case? The party system is now multi-party. You can't fit a two-party electoral system or you can't fit a first-past-the-post system into that party.
I do think in these circumstances, the case for first-past-the-post absolutely breaks down. And I also think just as an electoral system, in terms of its functioning, first-past-the-post breaks down. And I think what we would now have with those kind of numbers is an election that was basically a game of chance. Every seat in the country, it would essentially be like rolling a dice about what kind of outcome you'd get. Because if you'd have seats where you'd have 5 parties in contention, and people wouldn't know how to vote tactically, parties would be very unsure where to devote resources. I think there'd be a huge amount of randomness. And I think that when an election result feels random, it's hard for that result to feel legitimate. So I do think this is an existential problem for first-past-the-post.
And it is kind of bonkers that the party that's on 27% is seen as the potential government. 27% used to be like, sack the leader, to rethink everything, you're in the doldrums, and yet this is where we are now. It's like maybe a lesser degree of dissatisfaction than is felt with all the other parties. I don't know.
Yes, I think that when you have this kind of fragmented system, I don't think first-past-the-post works, and I don't think first-past-the-post can be relied upon to produce results that are in any way reflective of what the public actually wants.
It's funny how we are very much outliers in using it as well. When you look at who still uses first-past-the-post, it's basically the Commonwealth. It's India, Pakistan, the Caribbean, a couple of other places. I want to ask you, when have been the previous high points of enthusiasm for PR? I have a dim memory of the 70s. It might have been on the agenda. Have we ever been here before?
We absolutely have. There have been quite a few moments in the past when we came very close to getting electoral reform. I think the first of those moments would be 1917, 1918, when during the First World War there was a speakers' conference on reform of the voting system. And a large part of that was about enfranchising women and enfranchising the working class. But they also considered the electoral system. And the report that was produced by this cross-party speakers' conference called for the abolition of first-past-the-post and its replacement by a combination of the alternative vote and the single transferable vote. And what happened was that the Commons amended this proposal to remove the single transferable vote element and just go for the alternative vote. And then that was sent to the Lords. And the Lords went, we don't like the alternative vote. We like the single transferable vote. And so changed it back. And instead of having this original proposal, which had both AV and STV, you had the Commons calling for AV and the Lords calling for STV, and they couldn't agree. And the result of that disagreement was we ended up just sticking with first-past-the-post. So we came so close.
The finest political system in the world, David. We'd be insane to change it when it produces things like that.
It is worth noting, though, that the reform that was eventually passed, it kept first-past-the-post for ordinary constituencies. But one thing that was maintained was university constituencies. And we got rid of these after the Second World War. But in the interwar period, universities elected members of parliament. And those constituencies used single transferable vote. So it is actually the case that we have used proportional representation in elections for the House of Commons in this country, but only in university constituencies.
But David,
that's a great pub quiz question.
Yeah.
And in fact, there is a prime minister who was elected under STV, which was James Ramsay MacDonald, was elected as the member of parliament for one of the university seats. And so he was actually elected under Single Transferable Vote.
I'm filing that away.
But you see, the reason you can use, proportional representation in university seats is because the people there are intelligent enough to understand it. It's not fit for the common person. Don't you see?
I'm not actually sure what the debate was at the time that ended up with that kind of compromise.
Rachel, do you think, you mentioned the coalition being the only stable government of the past 20-odd years, did the coalition give coalitions a bad name, though, because the punishment beating the Lib Dems took afterwards?
I don't understand this question. because I sort of came of age, like the first general election I could vote in was 2010.
Yeah.
And my memories of, maybe I'm really naive, I don't know, my memories of the coalition government compared to everything that came after is it went okay. It doesn't seem to be, I'm not like a massive fan of either David Klemperer or Nick Clegg, but it doesn't seem to be as disastrous as what came after. I think it's certainly true that junior coalition partners in coalitions suffer. And that's what happened with the Lib Dems. And speaking to some of the Lib Dem officials and advisors who were involved in those negotiations, they learnt lessons from that. And there were things where they say, look, we negotiated all the policies that we wanted, but we didn't get any cabinet roles or as many cabinet roles as we should have done. And that was what would have made a difference. So there are certainly lessons that you can learn about how you structure those negotiations. But I don't think you can look back at all of the governments since 2010 and go, yeah, the worst one by far, definitely 2010,
This is because you're young and full of wonder at the world. When you clapped out an old like me, you can remember what government was like before the coalition.
I don't remember that.
And the coalition was pretty crappy compared to what had been going on for the previous, 20-odd years that I can vaguely remember.
I mean, for my part, I do think the coalition was one of the single most destructive governments we've had in this country for quite a while. But I actually don't think that's anything to do with the fact that it was a coalition. And I think that there's a big difference between the kind of policy substance of that government and the fact of coalition government. And I don't think that there is an issue with coalition government, and I don't think the public think there's an issue with coalition government. And the other thing to remember is that we have had coalition governments at the devolved level. So Wales has had coalition governments, Scotland has had coalition governments, and there hasn't been a problem with those being seen as particularly unpopular or illegitimate. So I think the idea that the British public hate the notion of coalition is a false one.
Well, the thing that is usually said is, well, we have no tradition of it. It's my favourite excuse for anything. Take the bins out. I have no tradition of it. So you're technically in the toilet. I have no tradition of it. Well, it's like, as you just pointed out, we do.
And we absolutely do. We also have a tradition of it in Westminster at various points before 1945. I mean, from 1931 until 1945, we were governed by a coalition government, a series of coalition governments, in fact.
Although we might not want to repeat the circumstances to run that experiment again. I don't know.
I mean, so in the 30s, it was called the National Coalition.
Yes.
It was the Conservatives, bits of the Labour Party, and bits of the Liberal Party. I mean, I wouldn't want to repeat that combination, but I don't think we can say it was just in wartime that we had these. There are a number of other points when we've had coalition governments.
It was an economic worldwide collapse as well. It could be anything. Yeah. Rachel, what about the vibes among the Tories? I mean, they are also in a position of looking for a big red reset button that they can mash and get themselves somehow back into the game. Is there anybody in the Conservative Party thinking, actually, you know what, we do not have a future? It was quite interesting to see in that poll I quoted before from whoever it was, National Centre for Social Research, there was a huge uptick in Conservative voter support for PR right after the election when they got battered.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. So the Conservative voters and Conservative members have a different view on this to Conservative MPs. And one Conservative MP was sort of pointing out to me that the people who remain Conservative MPs now after 2024, they're the winners. They're the few that managed to get through on first past the post. So it's not surprising that they have a different perspective to everyone who ran for a seat and lost their seat. It's interesting that first past the post that has worked very well for the Conservative Party for many, many decades, actually they were disadvantaged this time round. So I'm always wary of doing this, and I'm sure both of you will tell me off for even just alluding to it. But if you did try and map vote share onto seats, which you shouldn't do, and I know you shouldn't do, but if you did try and do that, then the Conservative vote share should have given them around 30 more seats. So it's no longer the case that the Conservative Party benefit from first past the post and all the other parties are disadvantaged by it. The other thing, way of looking at it is that first past the post, this is the randomness point that you were talking about, the lottery kind of idea. The Electoral Reform Society call it a winner's bonus. So whichever party is leading the polls gets extra seats because of how those lottery-style contests play out, which means that it's very disproportionate. And which party gets the winner's bonus tends to think that they act like they won it. So that was Boris Johnson in 2019. That was Keir Starmer and Labour in 2024. And now if you're looking at some of the seat projections, it could potentially be Reform. And so whichever party is in the lead, they get like an additional set of seats for being in the lead that makes them very reluctant to look at what's going on underneath. So is there a groundswell of support among Tories for this? It kind of goes against the Tory ethos, so no. And interestingly, in that 10-minute rule motion last year, all the Conservatives voted against it. Is it a conversation that is happening at membership level, like, given the post-apocalyptic emptiness of Tory party conference this year? Yeah, it's happening.
I was just going to say that the winner's bonus is often the case, but if only first past the post was that rational, because sometimes the bonus ends up going to parties that have a very well-distributed vote, but aren't necessarily the biggest party. So in the 1951 general election, Labour had more votes than the Conservatives, but actually first past the post helped the Conservatives more because of how the vote was distributed. And so the Conservatives won that election despite having fewer votes than the Labour Party. So first past the post gives out bonuses, but it's not always to the winners.
David, that I keep going back to this poll in June 2024. It found that 78% of Reform voters supported PR, and you can understand that because they got 5 MPs rather than PR would have given them around 93. I am pretty sure they'll have changed. A lot of them have changed their minds now that they're in the lead with a Planet smashing 27% of the vote. Does Reform stand to gain or lose if PR were to come in, or do we just not know because you're going into a world with no precedents?
I think it's the latter, that we don't know. There's a good chance that first past the post works out really well for Reform, and that the other parties, the vote is very split amongst the other parties, and that means that Reform, with about 30% of the vote, ends up sweeping a whole load of seats. But there's also a chance that first past the post works out badly for Reform. If the other parties manage to get their act together, if Labour recovers in the polls and is able to present itself as the option to stop Reform, and a whole load of votes coalesce behind Labour.
If there's a backlash, you mean?
Yeah, then there's absolutely a possibility that Reform gets a very good share of the vote, like 30%, but that actually doesn't translate into a huge number of seats. So I think Reform are really, like all the other parties, if they stick supporting first past the post, they're continuing to support a gamble. Now, I do think on balance, it's more likely that it works out well for them than badly. But I think the thing about first past the post today is that for anyone, it is a big, big gamble. And it'll be interesting to see what Nigel Farage thinks of that. Historically, he's been very much in favour of electoral reform. He's always been in favour of proportional representation. Whether he continues to be, I think we'll have to see.
Can I make another point on reform on Reform's policy on reform, which is that when I interviewed Richard Tice, who was leader of Reform at the time, this was in autumn in 2023, he told me that he thought first past post was sort of rotten and corrupt, and we needed proportional representation, and that Reform's policy would be to win enough of a high enough vote share in the election that it would pressure Labour into moving on that point, because it would be Reform and the Lib Dems and the Greens all going, this system is really unfair. And he was very upfront about that and very passionate about it. In that vote in December 2024, 3 of Reform's at the time 5 MPs, I know it's really difficult to work out how many MPs and which ones they had at various points, but 3 of them voted in favour of PR. One of them, Rupert Lowe, who's no longer with Reform, voted against, and Nigel Farage didn't turn up. So I think
very on brand.
Nigel Farage's perspective of this, I think, definitely has evolved, but it's worth going back and looking at what Reform was saying before the election, because it wasn't on the fence, it wasn't subtle, they were very clear.
David, I want to ask you, what went so wrong in 2011 with the referendum on the alternative vote? Because the first thing reformers say is alternative vote isn't actually really proportional.
So I think that there are a couple of things that went wrong. The first is that referendum was pushed for by Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems, and Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems fronted the argument for it. And at the time the referendum happened, everyone hated them. And all the progressive voters who they needed to mobilise had really turned against the Lib Dems, in my opinion, quite rightly. And that meant that any campaign fronted by Nick Clegg was pretty much bound to lose. Even beyond that, I think you can point to a lot of problems with the alternative vote campaign. There was no effort made to actually explain and defend the alternative vote. I think that was partly out of a fear that it would seem too complicated, and so they kind of resorted to kind of general slogans instead. And I think partly also because a lot of the people running the campaign for the alternative vote didn't actually like the alternative vote. They wanted some other form of electoral reform, and that meant they were pretty half-hearted in how they talked about the alternative vote, and ended up making these very kind of broad brush, vague arguments about the need for reform. On the other hand, the No to AV campaign ran an extremely cynical and very effective campaign, attacking the alternative vote directly in a lot of cases, making a lot of, I think, very spurious arguments about how it works, but nonetheless talking directly about the system, and at the same time trying to claim that it cost money. They basically did an early version of 350 million for the NHS, by claiming it was, I think, 350 million would be spent on voting machines, which wasn't true. But it was the same kind of playbook of, this is a referendum on a constitutional issue. Actually, our side is about more money for the NHS.
And going back to what you just started with how they weren't able to mobilise the progressive votes that they would have needed because everyone hated the Lib Dems, they also didn't make too much of an effort to mobilise the right-wing voters who might have wanted PR, so they didn't want to get UKIP involved in it. And I can understand why they would have been reluctant to get UKIP involved, but I do think sort of going back to, is this what we need to save the country from reform? It's not really the right way of framing it. We should be looking at what is the fairest and most constructive system overall, and getting parties across the political spectrum on board so it doesn't look like this is a right-wing effort, this is a left-wing effort, is going to be pretty critical to its success.
But the old school Tory argument, the old sort of paleo-Tory argument was, our great system is so wonderful because it results in moderation and keeps the loonies out. And what we've just had described here is something that's probably going to let the loonies in and give them full charge.
So I think, and again, correct me people who know more about this than I do, but I do think that that was an argument that was used in New Zealand that changed their voting system in the 90s. And actually the experience in New Zealand since then has been that majority of time it is one of the two main parties, and that it acts as a kind of release valve for steam and heat and anger that builds up in the system. And you do get more talking about the fringe parties. They get more of a say, but they also have to moderate the way that they interact with politics because they're all part of the system together. Is that fair? Yes,
I think it brings a lot of groups that would otherwise be excluded into the political system and forces them to engage in a more realistic way with politics.
Just in practical terms, I mean, how would this need to happen? I'm imagining that you can't just see Keir Starmer popping up at his spring conference saying we've got an amazing new policy, guys. We're going to change the electoral system. It would require some kind of cross-party, Royal Commission or something or other.
So the APPG on fair elections has put forward a proposal that I think is very, very useful and constructive, which is what they've called for is a national commission on electoral reform. And this national commission would be a non-partisan body, and it would combine, on the one hand, an expert panel and a set of commissioners who would run this process, but there would also be a kind of citizens' assembly element, what they call a voters' forum, and that would basically bring in ordinary people selected by lot, and their job would be to decide on the set of principles that should inform choosing an electoral system, and then you'd use the experts to kind of take those principles and go, okay, what does this look like in practice? What system would fulfill those criteria? And I think this is a really good proposal because I think you need to have the specific proposal of what electoral system you want not seem like it's coming from a particular political party for partisan reasons. And so I think this idea that there may be a vote in Parliament and that you'd agree on setting up this commission and you could get a broad coalition around the idea of a commission and then the commission would be responsible for coming up with a proposal. I think this is the way forward. And I think what is also worth thinking about is the fact that I think the votes might already be there in Parliament for setting up a commission like that. And I think it would only take a private member's bill that got sufficient support at the right time, and you could end up seeing such a thing set up, and then a lot of pressure being put on the government to follow the recommendations.
Troublemaking backbenchers, if you're listening, you just had your orders.
I mean, so I have to say, this idea isn't mine. This was raised at Labour Party conference. The Campaigns for Electoral Reform had a big event. They had a lot of different speakers there. I thought it was very interesting that the Labour Campaign for Electoral Reform was able to get speakers from across the different factions of the party. So you had Luke Akehurst on the kind of right wing of the Labour Party, but you also had Nadia Whittome on the left wing of the Labour Party. And I think what one of the speakers there said, which was Anne Black, who's a member of Labour's NEC, she said, we need our Kim Leadbeater. we need someone who can put this forward as a private member's bill. The votes are there. And I think she might be right.
Let's have a quick breather and a taster for today's edition of The Bunker. It feels like we're on a permanent crisis watch in this country over the potential rise of a form of fascism, worrying about whether the flag wavers, Tommy Robinson marchers and roundabout painters could coalesce into a truly threatening MAGA-style movement. Could it happen here? I spoke to one of the foremost authorities on how fascism rises, Professor Roger Griffin of Oxford Brookes University, about how the British and American far right differ and what's really happening in our country. You can listen right now. There's a link in the show notes, and here's a taster.
If you need to be mobilized to defend humanistic values, to think you're fighting a dragon called fascism, then fair enough, if that's what you need to motivate you. But how about the idea that we just see what's going on in reform and those flags, not as fascism, but as an attack on liberal democracy, an attempt to subvert the liberal, humanistic, if you like, good component of democracy. I mean, if you look at the history of democracy, it was the invention of a slave state. And if you look at early American and British democracy in the 18th century, it was completely compatible for Democrats then with male chauvinism, with war against the working classes, with slavery, with colonization, imperialism, etc. Democracy is not a nice phenomenon. It's always been extraordinarily elitist. And for about 200 years, it took massive struggle to liberalize democracy. And I think what we're witnessing is not the fascistization of democracy, but the deliberalization of democracy. When you see those flags, I don't believe you're looking at fascism, but I do believe you're looking at an absolutely lethal process in humanistic terms of deliberalization of British democracy. And I think that humanists should be mobilized by that and not have to be mobilized by the threat of fascism.
Right, now we're going to get into the really nerdy stuff, the systems and which one would suit Britain best. David, we already use PR a lot in elections. The Welsh Senate, the Scottish Parliament, the London Assembly all use versions of the additional member system, one vote for a constituency or borough and one for a regional party list. So are we already sufficiently used to it? You were sort of saying earlier in the pod that people get it now.
And keep in mind, I am taking notes on this because I find this confusing. So go.
We use a variety of different PR systems already, and I think that the public have always shown themselves very able to handle this. I don't think it's been a problem. So we use the additional member system in Scotland and Wales. Wales is actually at the next Senate election moving to a new system that will just be a straight party list form of PR. In Northern Ireland, for their assembly, we use the single transferable vote, which we also use in local elections in Scotland. So actually, we do have experience with pretty much all of these systems in different places in the UK and for different kinds of elections.
We used to have single transferable vote for mayoral elections as well.
Yeah. We used to have the supplementary vote.
I knew I was going to get marked down on this. Sorry.
And we've actually brought that back now. So again, we use all these different systems in all these different places. I don't think it makes sense to say there's any one system that we're particularly used to or particularly good at.
I'm going to ask you to do the impossible now and give me the one sentence, ultra condensed version of each of the key ones, right? Single transferable vote, STV, where you kind of rank things in order of preference. Go.
First, I'm going to explain what AV is, because I think it makes sense. So AV, which we had the referendum on in 2011, the alternative vote, it's like first past the post in that you're electing one MP in your constituency, but instead of just voting for one person, you rank all the candidates in order of preference, and then the ones who the lowest votes are knocked out, the preferences are redistributed. So the idea is that the person who gets elected can command a kind of overall majority in a forced choice situation. Then the single transferable vote is the proportional version of that. So you have a multi-member constituency. So let's say Oxfordshire, for instance, instead of having 6 different seats, would be one constituency that elects 6 MPs. But it would be like the alternative vote in that you would rank all the candidates in order of preference. And that means that you could almost split up your vote across different parties. So let's say I was voting in Oxfordshire, I could put a Labour candidate first, a Liberal Democrat second, maybe a Labour candidate third again, and then a Green candidate fourth, if I wanted to do so. And so it's a system that is proportional, but also lets you choose candidates, not parties.
So specific individuals.
Specific
So
individuals.
if you lived in a place where, for instance, you've got a Labour MP and you're not particularly a fan of that particular Labour MP, naming no names, then you'd get an opportunity to vote for other Labour candidates.
Exactly. So the single transferable vote is the system that most maximises the choice that the voter has, not only to choose parties, but also to choose within parties.
Okay. And the additional member system.
So that's what we use in Wales at the moment and in Scotland at the moment. And what you have there is you have two types of MPs. You have MPs who are elected in a single district, like in first past the post, and then you have kind of compensation MPs who are elected from a list. And the idea is this, it's that you elect your local MPs, but then you look at the result and you go, that isn't actually proportional. So we have a second vote where you vote for what party you like best, and then extra MPs are distributed to all the different parties in such a way as to ensure that the overall result is proportional. So, for instance, let's say that in the single member section, the Greens get no MPs, but on the list section, they got 10% of the vote. They would be given enough MPs from the list that would mean that they would actually have 10% of the MPs in Parliament.
So one of the arguments against that one is that it gives you two different types of MPs, and they could have sort of perceptions that they have different status, as it were.
So this is what they use in Germany, and it does mean you have two different kinds of MPs. You have MPs with a local mandate, and you have MPs who are only there because they have come from the party list.
And does that make a difference to their careers, their influence?
It doesn't tend to, as far as we can tell. In some ways, it probably strengthens you to be elected in a constituency rather than from a party list, but I'm not sure there's good evidence on any big impact. I think one thing to say about the system, though, is that it is potentially open to manipulation, which is that because you're assigned seats from the list in such a way as to ensure that the overall distribution is fair, what some countries that have this have is parties pretend that they're actually two different parties. And so what they do is so let's say Labour were doing this. Labour would run a load of people in the constituency section, and they would be pretty confident that they'd actually be overrepresented in that, so they're not going to get anyone from the list. So instead of running as Labour on the list, where they're not going to get anyone, they'd set up something called Labour 2. And then people would vote for Labour 2. And then they'd say, well, actually, Labour 2 has no constituency seats. So you've got to give us a load of compensation seats as well.
I think if Labour were to try that, it would go disastrously wrong for them.
I think it would. But what is interesting is that in Scotland, you've seen small parties kind of attempt to do this. So Alex Salmond's Alba Party, back when that existed, basically said, we are SNP2. If you want to maximise the nationalist bloc in Parliament, you might vote SNP in the constituency, but vote for us in the list because we won't have any constituency seats.
So they wouldn't actually call us as Labour 2. It would be more of a People's Popular Front of Judea, Judean Popular Front
Pretty
scenario.
much, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that it's a system with many strengths, but it is open to manipulation in that way, which I think could be a problem, especially in a kind of low-trust environment.
You were very keen to talk about the French-style two-round system, weren't you? Which, in my experience of French people, it gives them nervous breakdowns because they've got, like, the bit between the first election and the next one is just nervousness and terror. Explain. Why do you like it, or don't you like it?
So the way it works in France is that you have single-member constituencies like we do in the UK. Every party stands, you vote, but then what happens is the results are counted, and then there's a second round. And in any given constituency, any party that gets more than 15% of the vote can put themselves forward for the second round. And that does a few things. Firstly, it means that voters can make a tactical decision. Maybe I voted for a small party in the first round, and then I can see in the second round that actually the choice in this constituency is between two different parties, and then I can cast a very informed vote in the second round. And that's one thing it does. But the other thing it does is it forces parties to work together and negotiate. Because if you get more than 15% of the vote, you can go into the second round, there's still the potential for split votes in the second round. So what it leads to parties doing is negotiating about standing down for each other. So let's say you're the Green Party and you've done quite well, and so you've actually gotten into a lot of second rounds. You can then say to the Labour Party, we're risking splitting the vote here. If you stand down for us in maybe 10 places, we'll stand down for you in 30 places. And then what happens is not only do the voters get a clear choice in those second rounds, but they also have a very clear idea of which parties are allied with each other. And this is the one thing that I think people do dislike about coalitions. It's the sense that you might vote for a party thinking they have one set of politics, but then they go into coalition with someone unexpected.
Like the Lib Dems
exactly.
and Cameron.
Whereas in a French-style two-round system, it forces the parties to make the alliances between the rounds. And so it's not just that you get to have your kind of first non-tactical vote and then your second tactical vote. But when you make your tactical vote, you actually know exactly what the parties are doing in terms of who they're making deals with. So I think it's one of the systems that gives voters the kind of clearest ability to make informed choices, while also, unlike first past the post, avoiding perverse results and making it easier for small parties to get a foothold.
Yeah, there's no way we're importing that from the French.
I fear
cannot
not.
see that happening.
I think the major problem with that system is it's French.
Yeah.
And the British would never wear it. They'd think it was highfalutin.
We need like a British 2-round system.
I think the
named
real
after
problem-
King Arthur or something.
No, we sort of need a home and away leg. That's what we would
I think
understand.
the way to understand the system is it's the one thing Brenda from Bristol doesn't want.
Yeah, two elections.
Yes,
And
it's
it's
two
not-
elections
yeah,
for the price of
absolutely.
one every time.
Yeah, but also I guess being less, kind of a nativist reactionary about it, doesn't it just turn elections into kind of game theory, where you kind of, it's like these strange management training exercises where it's like, I give you 2 sticks, you give me 3. Aha, no, I've given it to the scorpion, which will sting you. You know, those kind of bizarre abstract games that you do when you blank look from Rachel.
No, I think the main problem with it is that it takes too long.
Yeah.
Like the multiple rounds, and we one of the things that I think British people quite like about our voting system is that we vote on a Thursday and we've got the result by Friday morning, which is not the case in America, where it takes them 2 weeks to count them, and other countries. And I think that is something that we do feel quite a lot of patriotic pride about.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case.
Yeah. I
But
think we also
nonetheless, I would say that I do think it is the system that would probably maximise the ability of voters to make informed decisions.
But we do also quite like that it only takes a month, and an American presidential election takes 18
Decades.
months, and
Decades.
it never stops, and it just drives you insane. Whereas, I mean, American friends are just amazed that we can pull off an election in a month from standing start.
And the fact that you get 2 constituencies that are sort of competing with each other to count the votes in, an hour and a half?
Yeah.
Yeah. We never want to get rid of that.
Makes you proud to be
What's all this
British.
going to do to the monster raving loony party? They're going to get MPs. David, from all of this, and you think about this a lot, which do you think is the best option in a mixture of comprehensibility and saleability to the British public, and being proportional, and being workable, and not requiring elections that take 18 months?
I really think this depends on exactly what balance of those things you want. If you want to maximise proportionality, and that's all you care about, then what you'd want is a straight party list system like we used to use in the European elections.
Like they have in Israel.
Like they have in Israel, like they have in the Netherlands. That maximises proportionality, but that also means you have no local representation. If you want to somehow have a system that balances proportionality, local representation, and a lot of voter choice, then what you want is the single transferable vote. That's what the Lib Dems advocate. That's what we use in local elections in Scotland. If what you want is it to be quite proportional, but you're very attached to the idea that we should still have some amount of single-member districts and places that have one representative, then what you want is the additional member system. And if what you really want is almost a more rational version of first past the post, where you want to keep majoritarianism, you want to keep single-member districts, you're not that interested in proportionality, but you do want to get rid of the randomness, and you do want to get rid of the risks of a minority party sweeping everything with that much support, then what you want is the alternative vote like they use in Australia.
Okay. What do you want?
I mean, I want the French 2-round system, but I know that nobody else wants that. I think right now, amongst those other systems in Britain today, I would either want the alternative vote, basically as a way of keeping things quite similar but avoiding the risks of first past the post, or I'd want the single transferable vote, which I think has a lot of merits and I think is used with great success in Ireland, for instance.
Rachel, are there any that you fancy if you give it a great thought?
I think that David has done an excellent job of explaining all of them, but it did take 10 minutes and it is confusing. And what Keir Starmer said when he was first elected, that we wanted a politics that tread more lightly on people's lives, is kind of true. People don't want to spend too much time and energy thinking about the voting system and thinking about how it all works. I think people do understand that the current system doesn't work, and there's a trust in politics point that maybe we can talk about in a moment. But I think the best version of proportional representation or voter reform is the kind that makes the most kind of intuitive sense and that people can just grasp and easily understand.
And which one is that?
For me, that's probably the additional member system like they've got in Scotland, because it seems to be working fine over there. It's got the local link. It's got the proportionality link. I didn't realise until you mentioned it a moment ago that it's possible for parties to game it. But I think that is probably the one that people are most likely to go, yeah, I kind of get it. And I think that sense of kind of getting it is really important.
I quite like the idea of seeing the Democratic Liberal Party standing and that kind of thing. You do say quite rightly that people want politics to just get out of their lives. But one of the other huge animating deep feelings at the moment is that people feel unheard and ignored.
Yeah.
And a large part of that is, look, I'm a politics wonk and my vote has never mattered once in a constituency.
Mine
not
neither.
once. And I vote assiduously. I might as well just go for a walk in the park. It makes no bloody difference whatsoever. Isn't there a message there? Like, your vote is going to count. You might have to think a little bit harder, but your vote, for many people, for the first time in your life, your vote is going to count. That's a cut-through message, isn't it?
I think it is. And I think there is a trend towards that. So one of the reasons the Brexit referendum went the way that it did is a lot of people who wouldn't normally have voted thought this time my vote's going to matter because it's a yes-no binary referendum. And they voted. I think you saw a similar thing in the Carefully by-election where you had people turning out to vote in order to vote for reform that hadn't been an option before and against reform to try and keep them out.
Yeah.
So voter turnout is higher in more proportional systems. And the point about trust in politics, for me, is really important because trust in politics has never been that high, but it is declining depending on which of the metrics and trends you use. The British Social Attitude Survey found that just 12% of people think that governments act in the best interest of the country. They don't feel represented. They don't feel heard. Now, you could say that's because they're voting and the way they're voting isn't being properly recorded with the outcome you get in Parliament. You could also say that they don't think that the parties are acting in their interest because they've got this voting system and they're trying to game the system with this sort of masterpiece of political Jenga thing.
Yeah.
I don't think that the reason people don't trust politics is entirely because our voting system doesn't map onto the way that they voted. But there is evidence from other countries that shows that if you have a clearer link between I vote at the ballot box and this is what I get, you do get more engagement. And I think that's where the argument has to be, to go back to the beginning. I think it shouldn't be about how do we keep out reform as much as we would like to do that. It shouldn't be about how can Labour revive its electoral chances. Like Vote 616, it's got to be something that works on its own terms.
I agree. And as somebody who absolutely wants to keep reform out, I also think that if you vote for them, you deserve to have your preferences recorded. I think that you have to accept that reform deserve to have MPs. They should have it in proportionate to their vote. And I wonder whether their lead in the polls at the moment is partly driven by the fact that the people who support them feel unheard, and this is their way of registering that. Now, if you're in a position where your reform vote can actually translate into an MP, do you start to think differently about it?
It's less of a protest vote.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered about the validity of, the strength of opinions in polls. People asked by someone on a telephone call or a clipboard in the street, what would you do under these circumstances? It's very different from what people do in a ballot box, as the legend of the shy Tory tells us every single time. And now that we're going into this different world where supposedly 27% of people are going to vote reform because they feel that they've been ignored and left out, it's one thing doing that in a first past the post system where perhaps there might be no real risk, you think, of them getting in. It's another thing doing it when you know that that's going to translate in some respect. It might concentrate the mind a little bit.
Bit more engagement, bit more thought, maybe not quite as much thought needed for a 2-round French-style system, but a little bit more awareness of what the party that you're voting for actually intends to do. Like, I imagine that not all of those 27% have read Reform's 2024 manifesto.
Well, it's like that, many people read the question in the Brexit referendum as, would you like to kick David Cameron in the balls? And the answer they gave was absolutely yes. And, we heard the millions of post-vote justifications from, I wanted to see what would happen, to, among my favourites was, I don't like Glynis Kinnock, that's why I voted to leave. That seems a bit harsh, But when you draw the vote closer to the actual product and you make people understand that when you do this, it's going to have an effect, that changes their calculus as well, I think. I don't know.
I think a key thing that electoral reform would do is it would move the kind of tactical considerations that really dominate how people vote. I think we saw in the last election, a lot of different seats, the result was decided by which party did people think was most likely to get the Tories out. And I think in the next election, you're going to have on the one hand people going, which party will be the best way to get Labour out? And on the other hand, people saying which party is the best way to stop reform.
Yeah.
And I think that will be very difficult in a lot of places. And people are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to work out what is the tactical option, and different parties will be trying to convince them. I mean, I'm sure the Lib Dems will have like the biggest suite of bar charts they've ever done. And I think that if you had electoral reform, you would avoid that and you'd make it much simpler for people, and they could feel pretty confident that wherever they are, they can vote in a way that they know makes sense and that won't risk being some kind of terrible mistake that lets someone else in.
Luke Trill from More in Common has this idea of the, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the Netflixization.
Okay. I'll allow it.
Netflixification?
Netflixification.
Of politics, which is people are already voting like they have lots of options. That's why you're getting polls that show 5, 6, 7 parties on high amounts. People are like with Netflix, where you've got a choice of 1 million as opposed to a choice of 5 channels. They want the choice. They want to look for options that they feel represents them. It's changed their attitude to what a party should be. It used to be, which of the 2 main parties am I mostly aligned with? I won't agree with all of it, but broadly, do I fit into one of those 2 camps? And now it's, can I find a party that is more tailor-made to me in the same way that our Netflix preferences are tailored to us? So I think whether we want to go back to 2-party voting or not, the public aren't there. The public are already looking for more choice and more options, and they're voting in that way. We just don't have a system that reflects the fact that that's the reality.
Well, they're polling in that way. I actually think there's a good chance that come the election, we'll end up with some kind of everyone is suddenly forced to vote tactically. Yeah. I think we saw this in 2019, we saw this in 2017. I think it's far from certain it will happen, but I actually think there's a really good chance that the public end up separating out into 2 blocks, both full of people who are very reluctantly voting tactically for whatever party they think in their seat either keeps out Labour or keeps out Reform.
Just to wrap up then, back to the very beginning, how likely do you think something's going to happen? Because we've got lots of parties now, and the one in power is on very thin ice. The one that used to think itself as the natural opposition is in a flat spin. We have an insurgent party at the top of the polls. What do we think is likely to happen in terms of this issue?
I don't see this happening before the next election. You've got 3 years. This is a massive project to run a consultation like that. You'd want to make sure you got it right. Labour have already brought in votes at 16. They're already looking at reforming the House of Lords and hereditary peers. There are big constitutional changes that are happening. This stuff takes time. It's expensive. And I just cannot see them ramming this through in the 3.5 years until 2029. I wish I could be like, there would be a moment of sort of national consensus and public reckoning where we all went, okay, let's do this. Just can't see it happening.
David?
So I agree that there would be a less than 50% chance that this would happen this Parliament. I would say that it's still a reasonable chance though. So I would say it's maybe a 25% chance that we get something happening on this Parliament. And then I think if we end up with a hung Parliament at the next election, I think that's the point at which it becomes highly likely.
The end of the show is here, and that means Escape Routes, where we reveal the new movies, records, books, TV shows, or other cultural distractions that have got us through the week. Rachel Cunliffe.
I'm so excited about this one. It's not new. It came out in June, but it's new for me, and I think I might be the first person to recommend it on this podcast because you're all much more intellectually serious than I am. K-pop Demon Hunters.
Okay, all right.
I have finally watched it. It's been half term, and I've had my stepchildren with me this week, and it's brilliant, and there's a sing-along version, and it's really, really catchy, and it will get in your head.
I realise this is a stupid question.
What
but
is it?
What is a show called K-pop Demon Hunters
it's not a show.
About?
It's a film. It's on Netflix. It's anime-style CGI animation, and it's about a girl band trio of K-pop singers who use their incredible musical talents to fight demons.
Okay.
And it's
real
brilliant.
Demons or figurative demons like sadness and being alone?
Oh, it's really interesting. You should ask that. You need to watch the film.
Okay. This sounds, older listeners, sounds a little bit like Josie and the Pussycats.
Blank looks. Blank look.
Blank
no
looks
comment.
again. Well, that sounds great.
I've had all the songs in my head all week, and I love it so much.
Good to know. David Klemperer.
Well, I've been enormously enjoying Lily Allen's new album, West End
right.
Girl. The songs are fantastic, but it has also filled me with rage and hatred against her ex-husband, David Harbour, who I now think we need to do some kind of patriotic war against. And, you know, that American won't be able to wrong our girls, and we should be banning him from the country.
So basically, you can't watch Stranger Things or Thunderbolts ever again because he's in it.
I've never actually seen
Well, there you
either
go.
Stranger
You're right.
Things or Thunderbolt,
I
so
tell you what,
there's no cost for me.
He's not in K-pop Demon Hunters.
There you go. Well, mine is this is probably the most me recommendation going. It's the opposite of a brand new record, but Pulp's Different Class just got re-released on its 30th anniversary, and I went to a special event last night where Miranda Sawyer from our partner pod, Talk 90s to Me, had a bit of a Q&A with Jarvis, Mark and Candida from Pulp. It was very entertaining. But to just hear Different Class through the colossal speakers again was amazing. And you forget just what, an absolute encapsulation of the 90s that record was. It's a full story, a journey through the class system, a journey through romance, and a journey through, still being up at 7 o'clock in the morning when you've been out overdoing it. But what struck me, I think I discovered about it, and I hadn't realised before, what it's really about is it's about loneliness. It's about being in the lonely crowd. It's about you're out, everybody's having an amazing time, but you feel detached from it and you feel separated from it, whether you're talking to somebody who came from Greece and had a search for knowledge and wanted to discover what ordinary people are like, or whether you're in the numerous kind of romantic disasters that Jarvis is describing on the songs. It is definitely the greatest album of the 1990s. You probably know it and have heard it, but if you haven't, there's a new version of it out this week, which includes the historic Glastonbury show where they basically became stars before everybody's eyes on the Glastonbury Pyramid stage, and that's out now. Different Class, 30th anniversary.
Do you know who she was who came from Greece and had a thirst for knowledge?
Well, it's supposed to be Yanis Varoufakis' wife, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
How, is this definitely true, or is it?
I think it's true. She definitely did study art at St Martin's at the time that he was there, and I think was the only female Greek student.
And she wanted to live with common people and ended up living with Yanis Varoufakis.
I couldn't comment on that, but she was from quite a wealthy Greek family. So
there you go. And that's the end of the show. Thank you, David Klemperer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel Cunliffe.
Thank you.
Listeners, thank you for listening. And extra special thanks if you're listening via Patreon, the crowdfunding platform that has kept us going for nearly 8 years now. Make a small contribution every month and you'll keep us in good shape. You'll get every edition early and ad-free and our desirable merchandise as well. There are new designs coming soon too. Follow the link in the show notes to find out how to back us. We would really appreciate it. If you've got questions for the pod, send them to info@romaniacs.com. You might make your emails. And don't forget Professor Roger Griffin on whether fascism is really rising in Britain on today's Bunker. There's a link in the show notes and it's out right now. Thanks for listening, or maybe even watching, and we'll see you at the end of the week.